Want to change your life? Then read these 15 books. I'm even going to throw in an extra bonus one at the end. I'm Steffi from Books That Teach Us, and today I'm going to talk about the 15 books that I feel truly changed my life. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean a big, huge life change, but they're all books that have influenced me, the way that I think about things, open my mind to more ideas and different ways of thinking, and books that I just feel have truly been beneficial to me. I hope they might do the same to you. Book number 1. This is a financial book about books about money. I am going to do a whole section on books that teach you how to be better with money in the future. So subscribe if you're interested on that. So this book is called Millionaire Teacher by Andrew Hallam. It's quite interesting because I've never read any financial books before. So I wasn't really sure what to expect. I am an English teacher. I don't like numbers very much or data. And so it was really interesting to me how readable this was and very sensible. So Andrew Hallam has worked as an international school teacher like me. He has been very shocked to find a lot of shady goings on with banks and teachers' pensions. So I decided to read this book because I thought I need to do something sensible in the future, but I don't really know what it is that I should do. And this book instructed you for what you should do with your savings, particularly focused on index funds and spreading your money across the market. Some things that I just have no idea about. I think he was really good, he is a maths teacher, at breaking things down and showing you this is exactly what you should do with your money. This is the advice. These are the less risky ways to do that. I just think it was really helpful, really readable. There were still some sections of it where I was like, oh, that seems a little beyond my scope, particularly in terms of like buying and selling stocks and things. But overall, I think it was really accessible and advice for someone quite new to finances and looking to do something fairly sensible and fairly low risk with their money, with the idea of long-term gain. And I mean over many years, like 25 to 30 years. So I won't know yet if this advice is sound for me until a long time in the future. But I do think it was sensible for me to learn about finances more, and I'm going to commit to reading a little bit more about financial books in the future, so that I can keep on learning about that area. My book number 2, I've gone for a spiritual topic this time, and it is called Tea and Cake with Demons by Adriana Limbach. I really loved this book. I read this book while I was in lockdown, in a quarantine hotel when I just moved back to Thailand for a new job. One of the things that Adriana does in this book is that she looks at Buddhism from an outside perspective and really breaks it down into how we can apply Buddhist beliefs and teachings and philosophies to our everyday lives in order to have a better quality of life. I loved the section of this book where she has journal prompts at the end of each section, and that was particularly beneficial for me at the time to reflect on because I was in quarantine with nothing else to do. So I think it's really good for self-reflection, really good if you're interested in Buddhism, because there's so many things that I learned in this book that I had no idea about before. And I think it really helps to look at Buddhism through perspective, or I just found that quite helpful of her breaking down the different things and explaining them to me in a simplistic way that helped me to understand. A lot of beautiful Buddhist teachings about kind of meditation, being present, about what to do with negative emotion, the importance of self-reflection. I think there was so much learning in this book that I do feel it still influenced me to this day. So I really recommend Tea and Cake with Demons. Before anyone freaks out, the demons refers to your own personal demons, and instead of kind of running away from those demons, our issues, our negative emotions, it's about inviting them in, accepting that we will have these kind of negative emotions and feelings that we don't want and we want to and that we want to run away from, but it's about inviting them in for tea and cake so that you can make peace with the range of emotions that we are all going to feel over our lives. So I really loved that part of the book as well. Number 3 is a young adult recommendation called Journey to the River Sea by Eva Ibbotson. I read this book when I was quite young, I think probably 11 or 12. I think it was one of the first adventure stories that I had come across. It made me so keen to go and visit Brazil. I think it was probably one of the first books that sparked an interest in travel and adventure for me. The main character goes to Brazil after her family dies, and she gets shipped off to go and live with some distant cousin. And the boarding school where she's at, they're all really looking after her and talking about how exciting it's going to be. You're going to see the Amazon, you're going to experience this different culture, all the food, the fruits, and they all get her really excited. And she moves there in with this distant English cousin of hers, and she discovers that these people live like they are not living in Brazil. They import tinned goods, spam, all these disgusting things from outside, and they won't have anything to do with the indigenous culture that they are surrounded by in Brazil where they live. I just felt, nowadays I realize, some people do really live like that, because I live abroad and I see some people in their expat bubbles and not really connecting with the place where they are. I think this was clearly an early lesson to me in that that's what I want to do. And it's this big adventure story that goes through the different characters that she meets as she travels. It really made me want to go to Manaus in Brazil, which I still haven't been to yet. So that's on my travel bucket list for the future. But I think it's fantastic when we can get young teenagers into reading books that really spark something in them for it. So I recommend this book for anyone who is interested in adventure stories and getting that passion and that inspiration for travel at an earlier age. Book number 4 is The Book of Boundaries by Melissa Urban. I really recommend this book to anyone who doesn't know what a boundary is, has felt before that someone has overstepped but they didn't know what to do in that moment, has problems with self-discipline because it also teaches you about self-boundaries. And I just think it's a really good book for teaching us about what to do in those moments where we feel uncomfortable but we don't know what to say or do about it. And Melissa has this fantastic traffic light idea where when first someone kind of oversteps and you feel very uncomfortable with something that someone has done to you in particular, and you have a green boundary. So you kind of flag it up to them and say, hey, that makes me uncomfortable, or can you please not do that? Then you have an orange traffic light boundary where they've done it again. You're going to push a little bit more this time and be like, hey, that is not acceptable. This is my limit. And then it goes into a red traffic light boundary of, can you please leave my house? Can you please go outside? Something where there is a limitation that protects you and your mental health and your well-being. I think Melissa does a fantastic job of explaining exactly what boundaries are. So they are not about controlling other people. They are about allowing what is going to come into your space and what you will do about it if someone oversteps that boundary. I think it's just really an empowering book that has really helped me personally. I'm so glad I read it. I really recommend it to anyone who has felt that uncomfortableness and that not knowing what to say, because she provides these amazing scripts. Number 5. This is a topic for career for me, because I think it's important that I include a whole range of topics in this list. And this one is a teaching book because I am a teacher, and it's called Teach Like a Champion by Doug Lemov. If you are a teacher or a budding teacher, then I absolutely recommend this book. It's huge, about this big, and Doug Lemov has tried and practiced activities for all sorts of different classrooms included in this book, so it's not just aimed at English teachers, all about ways to capture attention, ways to engage students. A lot of the research for this book was done in quite challenging environments for teachers, so a lot of underfunded schools, lots of schools where behavior management isn't. I just think it's so fantastic at making sure that we as teachers are compassionate to the students we are working with, that even when those students are acting out, we can still hold compassion for them, and we can find all these very clever ways that are quite simple really to keep students engaged throughout the entire lesson. So there's a whole section about lesson structure and lesson planning. There's some fantastic activities in terms of very basic things like making sure the teacher can scan the room the whole time, how you set up the room in terms of classroom management. I loved a lot of things he suggests about even getting students to track other students, because I've noticed this sometimes. Teenagers, someone's talking, but they won't be looking at them. And it's all about, no, that's who you should be looking at, to show them respect when they're answering a question. Some really great things about making sure we don't just say, oh, okay, this person attempted an answer and I'm going to let it go now, but really kind of drawing that student out, making sure that they know you want to hear their voice and you want their opinion and that you respect that. And I think that was just really encouraged me to do the cold calling thing that I know probably a lot of teachers to begin with are very anti, and I know I was very anti this at school. And I've totally done a 180 on this since reading this book, because I think cold calling is so important so that every student in the room knows that they are expected to contribute and participate, and that we value their voice. And I want to hear every student's voice in the classroom throughout each lesson. So I think that was really empowering to me and really a game changer in my attitude towards certain techniques for teaching. I am going to do a whole video soon on teaching books, so watch the space for that coming up soon. Number 6 is The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari by Robin Sharma. Now, this was probably one of the first, I would say, personal development books that I read, and I was a little skeptical at the time, coming from a mainly fiction background of reading, but I actually think this book was really meaningful. It is very simply written. Basically, there's a fictional storyline within the book, and the character teaches another character about these steps to a happier life, a more peaceful life, a more purposeful and meaningful life. It's all about this guy who was a hotshot lawyer, went off to Nepal, came back after spending time with the monks and wanted to teach this kind of Zen philosophy and spread it round to previous colleagues around the world. And it's not about having to give up all your earthly goods, hence the bit about him driving a Ferrari, but it is about what is actually purposeful and meaningful, taking meaning in everyday activities, slowing down, thinking about your routine and making that routine purposeful. I loved the things about even your lunchtime can be meaningful and purposeful. And I think as a busy teacher, sometimes I'll just work through my lunch break, I'll be checking emails. And this book was a reminder to not do that. And what I actually do now is I come away from my desk, I sit at one of the tables in my classroom, I read a book, and occasionally I do yoga as well while during my lunch break. And I think that has just been bringing that nice calm moment to my routine every day, and I look forward to it so much. So that has been really quite life-changing for me. I didn't necessarily start that immediately after this book, but this book is a reminder of constantly checking in with how your day is going. What are you doing in your daily routine to look after yourself? Number 7. I have mentioned this book before. It is an emotional one. It is 1,000 Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini. I read this book when I was quite young, probably 17 or 18 when I was on holiday. And I think it is one of the books that made me more of a feminist and made me more aware of injustice in the world. 2 things that I think are incredibly important and life-changing for me as a person. I think that this book really pulled on the heartstrings in a positive way, makes you realize how lucky I am, made me realise how unlucky and what awful situations some other women can be in, and really how important it is that we are standing up for each other, that we are educating young girls, that we are just holding compassion for people, and not compassion in a pity kind of way, but the kind of compassion that comes from a positive place of change. This book is a historical fiction story set in Afghanistan, and each chapter is written from the point of view of 2 wives who are married to the same man. There's the first traditional older generation wife, and there's the young wife who has very much been married against her will, and it's about their initial dislike and hatred towards each other, and then how their friendship grows and evolves, and it's this incredible story that I really recommend that will make you cry, but I think it's really a heartfelt, important book to read. Number 8, It's Not That Radical by Michaela Loach. This is a book on the climate crisis that is actually a hopeful read. Michaela Loach I've been following for a while on Instagram. She's a young Jamaican British activist, and she posts a lot about the climate crisis, about the intersectionality of the climate crisis in a really understandable way. She's quite often on TV being interviewed about climate change and ways that we can all get involved. And I love this book because it's not just, oh, okay, we should be recycling individually. It's about grassroots movements. It's about being part of community. It's about advocating for people. It really teaches you how interconnected everything is. And I've heard people mention about climate change being a single issue kind of activism, and that couldn't be further from the truth. The climate crisis will affect everyone, and it affects certain people right now, particularly people who live in coastal communities, people who live on small islands where the ocean is rising, people who are female. You are more likely to be killed in a natural disaster if you are a woman. There are some really shocking statistics out there, and this book treats them seriously but gives you optimism for the future, that actually a different world is possible, but it's not possible if we aren't even open to it. And I think before reading this book, I wasn't even open to it. I thought, this capitalist, patriarchal world is the one we're in, and it feels so impossible to change it. And then you have these shining rays of hope like Michaela Loach and many of the people that she works with and encounters and interviews and quotes in this book, and you realize, no, there's a whole sea of change of people out there, and they're the ones we need to listen to, and they're the ones we need to platform. And it just took me a few weeks after reading it to really process how important this book is. I've also just seen that Michaela Loach has a second book out that I'm really interested in reading. I think it's called The Climate is Just the Start. So I'm really interested in reading that one next. If you've read it yet, please let me know below in the comments what your thoughts were. Number 9. This book is called Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. Elizabeth Gilbert, you may know from her Eat, Pray, Love book. And I've read quite a few of her stories, but this one is quite different because it's all about creativity and some amazing stories that she has about creative people, about the way that we create just incredible spiritual universe kind of moments that people have had in terms of how they write their poetry and create their art and come up with their stories, and really outside of the box thinking that like there's this idea floating here, and if it floats to me and I have this idea but then I'm not ready to take it on board, then it's going to float off to someone else. And this actually happened to Elizabeth Gilbert and one of her friends, and this idea they had for a book was that they both had very similar ideas for the same book, but Elizabeth Gilbert hadn't written it yet, and so she thinks this idea floated off to somebody else who was ready to write it. It is magic. I think it's a really magical book. I'd love to know if you've read it. Let me know. It just really is inspirational, and as someone who would like to be more creative, I do have an idea for a novel that has been turning in my mind for the last few years. I have started writing it, and I just think it's really inspiring. So if you need a little dose of inspiration from creativity, definitely read Big Magic. There's so much to learn from it, so much opening of the mind that came from me reading this book. Number 10. I have just finished this book a few days ago. It is called The Happiness Revolution by Dr. Andy Cope and Professor Paul McGee. And I think this did a really good summary of lots of the information that we know about happiness, about building a better life for yourself, and condenses it into a really readable, often quite funny book that also had some poignant moments where I wanted to cry. This was one of the books that I've been reading at lunchtime, bit by bit, and I think that's really been beneficial for helping me to process the different sections. I also just bought this and sent it to my best friend to read in England. One of the main takeaways that I learned from this book is a reminder that we must all know deep down, but they're talking about social media and about how usually we are sold products and we are the consumers and we buy those products. But with social media, we are the product. It is us and our information that is being sold to companies. And to me, that just blew my mind. Maybe I should have known that earlier, I don't know, but I just thought, wow, what an important way of thinking about social media and if we should be spending so much time there, and just really powerful. That one really made me think. It also has this amazing section, if you're interested in languages, which I am, on different words around the world and what they mean. I'm not going to go into any spoilers, but there are some words in German and Finnish and Japanese that it's very impossible to translate into English because they're these beautiful concepts, things like light filtering through trees and the idea of hygge, that cozy feeling that you have when you're with people, and it really focuses in on that. So I absolutely loved that section of the book. Okay, I got cut off in the middle, so I'm refilming this section in the dark. But basically, this last part of this book has some really beautiful, poignant stories at the back that just tug on your heartstrings and make you realize like what's important in life and what do we really value in life. So I definitely really recommend this one. I just bought it for my best friend and I recommend this one for you if you just really need that boost of positivity and reminder of what's meaningful. Okay, number 11 is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. Now, I mentioned this already. I have a whole video just on this video, which you can watch here if you're interested. This is one of the best non-fiction books I have ever read. Rebecca Skloot was a journalist who, when learning about science at school, learned about HeLa cells, and her teacher happened to mention they came from a woman called Henrietta Lacks. And Rebecca Skloot then went on this deep investigation into what are HeLa cells and why are they from this woman called Henrietta Lacks. Henrietta's cells have been sold globally. They have revolutionized modern medicine. They have been used from everything from cancer research to Parkinson's disease, and they are still sold currently by the vial by pharmaceutical companies. However, Henrietta Lacks' own family are still living in poverty and cannot afford basic health care. Rebecca Skloot went in to investigate all this. There's this really beautiful, intricate storyline of what happens when Rebecca Skloot meets the Lacks family. And it's all about what happens in terms of the family alongside the science that is happening at the time. And I think she does a fantastic job of marring the very real human life side of things alongside medical revolutions and advances that are happening at the time. And all Henrietta Lacks' daughter really wants is for her mother's cells to be acknowledged. And this is one of the few books where after I read it, I felt such an urge and such a sense of injustice that I went and I donated to the Henrietta Lacks Foundation that the Lacks family alongside Rebecca Skloot set up as a result of this book. I really recommend it. I think it is one of my top non-fiction books out there. It covers so many areas of modern medicine, the ethical side of things, what it means to give your cells to science. Is it right to donate your cells to science unwittingly? Is it okay for doctors to use your cells without your knowledge and then for pharmaceutical companies to profit off them? Can we profit off our own cells if we know they are valuable? This book throws up so many questions, and one of the deep learnings for me was that I, in my privileged world, have grown up with a trust of science, with a trust of medicine, with a trust of doctors. However, this book made me appreciate that many, many people will not feel the same. This book taught me about deep-rooted injustices done by the medical community, by doctors who were trusted at the time, particularly to poor Black communities in the US, how they were exploited, how they were tested upon, it is just absolutely grotesque what happened to people. In some situations, people were even purposefully injected with something so doctors could experiment on them and see what happened without them knowing. And it is such a violation of people's bodily rights. And so I really understand as a result of this book why some people now have a deep mistrust of the medical community because of what happened to them. I think that's totally understandable, and I guess I never realised that before. Definitely, please read this book. I think it should be on must-read reading list for everyone, particularly anyone who's interested in science. Number 12 is The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. This book really changed my life in terms of informing me about trauma, about how people react to trauma, and about ways that people can heal from it. I think this is one of the first and foremost books that people who are interested in trauma-informed teaching, trauma-informed parenting, just generally living in the world when we know how many horrific experiences that people have gone through, and this is a way of healing from that. Bessel van der Kolk himself mentions about his own father, who was abusive and who was a survivor of the Holocaust. And you understand how the way that his father was treated obviously deeply affected him, and then that deeply affected his ability to love and parent and be an effective, loving parent. And it just makes you think, my gosh, how many people must that be affecting as a ripple effect? Obviously, as a teacher, you think about all the children that I've come across, all the students, and how they're reacting in certain ways. And it's just really, really powerful to think about. And this book, sorry, you see my foster cat, it's been a little noisy while she's playing, aren't you? It just really makes you aware of the magnitude of people that trauma affects and the ripple outwards of how many people that must then affect for everyone that comes into their sphere. And it's absolutely fascinating about the healing process. It's not an easy book to read. The first half is quite grueling. I burst into tears a couple of times as some of the information that he was sharing. But then you've got the last third of the book where it's talking about all the interventions and the positive healing points that are happening. And I always love it when the modern medicine meets the ancient wisdom and people are focusing on things like meditation, on mindfulness, on community, on unity. There's an amazing part about drama and role playing and that coming together to help people to heal. There's this amazing thing about reprocessing trauma. So one of the main things that happens to people who have experienced something horrific is that their brain obviously usually hasn't processed that memory into the past, so they keep reliving it as if it's a present memory. Our eyes are very related to how we process memories. So therapists and practitioners get the patient to think about what happened to them, and their eyes are then trained to move in a certain way, and it helps them to reprocess that trauma and put it into a past memory rather than treat it as a present one. I just think that is mind-blowing, and what a game changer. I've talked a lot with my sister about this because she's a mental health therapist and really interested in the type of therapy that can help people reprocess trauma. It's called The Body Keeps the Score, so about how we feel trauma in the body and where, and how things like yoga and movement can help to heal that. And I just think it's so important that we're all aware of this, because we are undoubtedly meeting people almost on a day-to-day basis that have experienced horrific things in their past and are trying their best to heal from it. And I think it's really important that we learn about that so that we can meet them from a place of compassion. Number 13 is Atomic Habits by James Clear. Now, I came across James Clear while he was being interviewed on Brené Brown's podcast. I'm going to link her podcast called Dare to Lead. And it's all about how small, consistent habits can really take our lives further, be a game changer, give us back time we didn't know we had. And there's some really useful information in terms of building habits. I am going to do a whole video series on personal development books that can help with routine and help us to stay consistent with habits. So this is one of the books that are going to be in it, but I will do a whole series soon. So subscribe if you're interested in that. Some of the main takeaways that I learned are about habits relating to your environment. So it's very difficult to build a new habit in an old space where you had a habit previously. So for example, if I say, okay, I'm going to get home from work and I'm going to read a book and sit on the sofa, but if I normally sit on the sofa and I pick up the remote and I watch TV, it's very difficult to reprogram my brain to do that. So it's really good to have designated spaces in your home where you are going to create new habits. And I love that. And I've actually been building on this in my own classroom when I come away and I have my lunchtime read to sit somewhere totally different that I don't normally sit, so that I can kind of reprogram that in my mind. And then hopefully whenever I sit in that particular space, it's like, this is my time to read and have some self-care time for me. And I love that. There's another really interesting takeaway that he said about habit stacking. And it's where when you already have a habit in place, like brushing your teeth, it's quite easy to then stack something on top of it. So it's like, when I brush my teeth, then I'm going to do my skincare routine, and things like that can be really helpful. So there's a whole wealth of information, all backed by science there, but James Clear makes it really obvious what to do, and it's a really accessible read while based on all the deep science that has been done around it. So I think that's what made it really interesting, and the fact that just our life is made up of habits, and let's make them good ones. Number 14 is My Own Story by Emmeline Pankhurst. For those of you who don't know, Emmeline Pankhurst was one of the leading suffragettes in the UK who fought for votes for women. She fought for a very long time for women to have a right to vote. And as a result of reading this book, I will always vote, because I know how difficult it was for women to achieve the right to vote and be on the same political level as men. Really classic read, obviously written more than 100 years ago, but it's really quite accessible. And I recommend it for anyone interested in women's rights, in history. It's very interesting about extremism and militantism. Emmeline Pankhurst and the suffragettes were seen as a militant group because they would destroy property and they would smash windows, but they would never ever take lives. That was their main thing, is that we are not here to hurt people and to take a life. We are women and we bear life. We don't have the right to take away lives, which I think is so admirable. However, I also think it meant that they got the right to vote later than, because men in a similar situation who did not have land at the time were violent, did cause a death, and they then got given the right to vote. So I think it's very interesting in terms of what activist groups have to go through or feel they have to go through in order to get what they want and get what they feel they deserve on an equal footing. I really recommend the book for anyone interested in British history. I think it's a really important read and quite an accessible one for one that was written 100 years ago. Number 15, my last book, is Factfulness by Hans Rosling. I absolutely loved this book. It is all about how our views of the world are not quite in line with the facts. So right at the beginning of the book, there's a little quiz that you do, and basically it teaches you how wrong you are about the world. I was extremely wrong about the world. So it asks you about if things like poverty are increasing or decreasing globally, and all about developing and developed countries and where we think people are sitting economically and the type of jobs that people have. And I was so wrong, very pleasantly happy to be wrong, because it meant that actually things are better than I think they are. Hans Rosling realised people around the world, including world leaders that are making laws and recommendations on this, don't know what is actually improving and what is declining. So he set out on this mission to educate the world, including our top political leaders, on what is really important. one of the main things I learned from this book was about, we've always talked about developing and developed countries, and he said, no, that's not adequate enough to be talking about all these countries in the world. So he talks about 4 tiers of countries, and the lower tiers have the same kind of kitchen equipment, toileting, fuel that you use, what a house would look like, and it's what things look like at different points in the tier. He's shown how in the last 50 years how so many countries have moved up the ladder to give people much more of a quality of life, so that people around the world do have access to fuel and fires and electricity, and the ability to have some extra disposable income to spend on some of the things they want to. So it was a really hopeful read. My only downside is that it was published in 2015, and obviously 10 years later. I would love to know more of an update. Unfortunately, Hans Rosling did pass away in that time, and this book was done in conjunction with his son and daughter-in-law. So I really hope that they are working on an updated version, because I think it would be so interesting to know more of the updates on this, and to just get all our facts and our assumptions in line with what's actually going on. I think it's a really important read for positivity, for realigning what we think is going on to what is actually going on. And I think it's a must read for everybody, just to do a check-in of what we think is actually happening. Okay, so I know I've done 15, but I'm going to throw out one more because I only just started it today, but it's already blown my mind. This book is called 4,000 Weeks. By Oliver Burkeman. The premise is we have 4,000 weeks to live our lives if we are lucky, which sounds like a depressing premise, but it is not. It is all about, what are we going to do with the time that we are given? This time is so vital, so essential. Why are we stuck in these productivity things? And it really made me think about the habit book. And yes, okay, that's important. We have some of our good habits and routines, but what is that freeing us up to do? And what are we going to do with the time that is freed up? Let's say we move to 4-day weeks. Let's say we only work 15 hours a week. What are we actually going to do with that time? Oliver Burkeman in his book talks about how in the 1930s they were saying, oh my God, all this technology is going to revolutionize stuff, all these modern conveniences in the future. We're going to have so much free time to do all the things we want to do. And now we're there in the future. And what are we doing with this time except filling it with trying to earn more money, trying to buy more things, keeping up with the Joneses? There's a lot of philosophical questions that he includes, a lot of quotations from people globally and throughout history, and I am absolutely loving it so far, and I think it's going to be really meaningful. So I will do a whole section on that book, along with some other development books that I've been reading that I would love to share with you guys. Thank you for listening. If you are interested in more booktube videos from Books That Teach Us, upcoming I have the classics, I have my Southeast Asia book recommendations, I have Thailand book recommendations, and many more coming your way soon.